Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kirishanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay. 1,000 years in under an hour.
Oh my.
Okay. And you should watch the Talmud videos. They're lots of fun.
They're on your website.
They're on the website.
Okay.
Hello. So, lots of fun. So, you go to religious school, and they teach you, depending on which religious school, if it's Reformed, Conservative, Orthodox, and they teach you about the Torah, and they teach you about the Bible, and then maybe they'll teach you about the Talmud, right? And then they start teaching you with middle-aged commentators, Rashi, Ramban, which we'll go into next week, and they start teaching you all those things, right? Pass the tzedakah box around. And most people, so how many of you went to religious school at one point or another in your life?
Religious school like Sunday or actually whole like,
Temple religious school.
No, but what about day school?
Day school too.
Yes.
Okay.
Sunday school.
Sunday school, right? Sunday religious school. You went to temple, whatever it was, right? And you know, they teach you about the Bible. Maybe they taught you about Talmud. They teach you the temple was destroyed. And then they bypass this 1,000-year period. And they start teaching about commentators and the Middle Ages. So what happened in this period? And that's what we're going to deal with tonight. So 1,000 years in an hour. Okay, that averages out to 15 years a minute. Yes.
From the destruction of the temple to the Middle Ages.
Right, because that period ends up being lost in Jewish education. And the reality is it's an incredibly important time period because of what happens. So let's just recap for a minute, right? In 587 before the Common Era, the first temple is destroyed by the Babylonians, okay? We go to Babylon, temple's rebuilt by Ezra and Nehemiah, like we studied. Some Jews stay in Babylon. They stay there until the 1970s as it becomes Babylon, the Ottoman Empire, Persia, the Ottoman Empire, ultimately Iran, and then with the Ayatollah, they come out in the 70s. So if you want to understand biblical Judaism and authentic Judaism, one of the best places to look is at Mizrahi or Iranian communities and their practices, okay? Because they were contiguous in that area for 2,000 years, right? So that's why the customs, I really love the Persian community for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons I love just praying in the Persian community is that the customs are often ancient, the way we do things. As an example, the bima, where the rabbi sits, where the rabbi stands, the bima, do you go through the rabbi to get the Torah? No, Torah is given to every Jew individually. So I may have told you, I don't remember because I don't remember what I say. But that I was once offered a job at a temple, and I went to the temple. It's an old temple. I went to the temple, and I said, "You don't want me." I said, "You haven't even started negotiating the salary yet with the committee." I said, I don't need to. You do not want me." They said, "How can you say that?" I said, "Because for 50 years, you have the rabbi's pulpit in front of the ark, which means you're rabbi-centric. The first thing I'm going to do is move the rabbi's pulpit to the side and the cantor's pulpit to the side. And it's going to flip everybody out because all of a sudden it's Torah-centric, not rabbi-centric. We are not rabbi-centric. We are Torah-centric. We are God-centric. Okay? I am not the pathway for any of you to deepen, to your pathway to God. I can educate, I can teach, I can help, I can give techniques, I can give all sorts of information, I can guide all sorts of things, but I am not the bridge. Okay? So if you go into a Persian temple, has anyone ever been in a Persian temple? Where's the rabbi's pulpit? In the center of the room. Absolutely. Everyone's looking at the ark that way. He is the Baal Kriya, the master of calling out, and you're leading the service that way. It's Torah-centric.
I thought that was the Hasidic.
No, that's actually Jewish. That's the traditional Jewish way, and it's still practiced in the Persian world.
Wait, you said rabbis in the center or the Torahs in the center?
The rabbis in the center. So everyone's around, like right here, okay, just like we are right now. Everyone's, from there coming back, and the Torahs where Alan is. And we're all facing the Torah.
So
We're all facing the ark.
okay, got it.
So you don't have to go through the rabbi. The rabbi may be leading, but he's not the gateway. He's not the gatekeeper. Okay? It's very important to understand that. So what happens in Judaism is in 587, the first temple is destroyed. They go back, and some stay in Babylon, which comes ultimately Iran. And the second temple is rebuilt. That's destroyed in 70 of the Common Era. Now we have a challenge that is unique in history to have succeeded at, which is we have to create a portable homeland. We have to create a Judaism that will work without being on our indigenous land, because with the second destruction, we're all dispersed everywhere. Babylonians, we just went to Babylon. The second one, we're put everywhere. The Romans send us everywhere around the world. So we need to understand that that's going on, and it's just destructive and creative all at the same time, and of how we have to re-identify how did this happen to us. And so we have this book, Lamentations, that we discussed, which is actually called Echa in Hebrew, meaning how. This is how it happened to us, okay, which is the book we read on Tisha B'Av, because that's the date the temples were destroyed. So we had to figure out how do we keep being Jews without our homeland, without our temple. And we succeed. And we succeed because of what happens over the next 1,000 years. First, we're just in pain and we're just in shock, the same way that we are about the Holocaust, right? In fact, the term Shoah comes from the destruction of the temple. So we've got to reevaluate what is Judaism. How could God be all-powerful, all-good, all-knowing, and all-present, and the temple be destroyed? And by the way, thank God the temple was destroyed. Let's be clear on that. Because if it hadn't been, all the Jews would have been in one place and easily wiped out at some point during history. Okay, so we would have been wiped out. We would have been in one country, one area. You don't see any Assyrians or Babylonians walking around. We would have been in one area, and if a conquering nation had come at us, we would have been gone. Okay, so there is a benefit that God gave us in this, even though we didn't see it at the time. Yeah, of course. No, you can never ask a question.
Jeremiah, was he the prophet that spoke of the Babylonian temple destruction?
Yeah, all the prophets in the Bible, in the Tanakh, are talking about the Babylonian temple destruction. All of them, because the Bible ends with Ezra and Nehemiah, which is the rebuilding of the second temple. Okay, so that's all that time period. All those prophets are all in that time period.
So let me just understand. So you're saying it's a good thing, but Jeremiah was lamenting, and
I didn't say it wasn't a sad thing.
I understand.
But in the long term, if we had stayed in Israel, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be existing. I mean, that's, God gives us that land, but we got to be dispersed, and we have to learn from dispersion. And by being dispersed, we get to preach our message around the world of ethics and one God and all that.
But I heard that in the Torah, it's that one of the curses that God tells the Jewish people is to be dispersed.
Right.
So it's a good thing, but it's also a curse?
Yeah.
Okay.
But remember, we turn curses into blessings. God turns curses into blessings. Yeah.
I thought we weren't supposed to preach our religion, or
No, but by our existence, we end up sharing values that were not in the world at that time. Right? Okay. Now, let's go. What also happens in the same time period of the destruction of the temple is there's this guy named Jesus, and he dies, and you have the Gospels written. Now, gospel literally means good news. The Gospels are not written by Matthew, Luke, John, etc. It's the first thing to understand. Those men did not write the Gospels. There's no academic that I've ever heard of that questions that issue. They did not write it. What happens is that their disciples' write the book in their name.
So when we say Matthew 13:2, it's not really Matthew.
It's the book of Matthew, chapter 13, verse 2. But not written by Matthew,
Okay.
but written in his name.
Got it.
Okay? They're actually written anywhere between 60 of the Common Era and 150 of the Common Era. Okay? So now let's look at what's going on in that time. The early Christians, okay, the Christian Jews, experienced a tremendous amount of hate from the Jewish establishment, right? They established, there's a lot of things you're going to know about because of anti-Semitism, the roots. They experience it because it's like, oh, you guys are crazy with this Messiah, you know, this guy that says, hey, what are you worshiping him? What are you doing? Okay. And they experience a tremendous amount, not only persecution from the Romans, but from the Jewish establishment as well. The Gospels are written as a polemic against that. That's why you see clear anti-Semitism in the Gospels. Okay. Also, clearly written by people who did not know Judaism. Professor Zev Garber is really one of the experts on this. So, as an example, we have Shabbat, right? What do we do first, wine or bread? Wine.
Wine.
It's not. This isn't a trick question,
Wine.
right? We all know wine, right? Okay. If the Gospels in different places record bread being done before the wine. That's just as a simple example. Clearly, people who didn't practice Judaism, which his disciples would have done, right? So, Gospels are written so you have this anti-Semitic flavor that they not only blame the Romans for the killing of Jesus, but they blame the Jews. Okay, this sets us up for what is called deicide. Not only did we, did the Jews not accept Jesus, but they killed God. All right. So now you have in these Gospels anti-Semitic tones and phrases and overtones. Okay. Again, an example. I'm not saying there was not a covert relationship between the leaders of the Sanhedrin and the Roman government in the time of Jesus. Okay. I'm not saying that wasn't the case. It may or may not have been. But you could not, they could not have selected to have a trial of Jesus or for the people to gather to say, we're going to go and do you want Jesus free or do you want Barabbas, the thief, free? For the Jews to have said, no, we want the thief. Why? Because it was during Pesach. It's during Passover. So if I showed up to you and I said, guys, you're not going to believe this. I was in traffic court and I beat the traffic ticket. It was on Sunday, December 25th. You would look at me and say, Rabbi, you're crazy or a liar or both, because there is no court on December 25th on Sunday, right? You can't have court on the first, second day of Passover, can you? It's not allowed, right? So it's not even a possibility. Yet that becomes the myth. Okay, yeah.
I've been under the impression that it probably wasn't Pesach, but that it was Sukkot.
It probably was Sukkot, okay, because that's when they bring out the palm fronds, right? But can you have, it's the same laws, same laws, same thing laws, right? And it probably is Sukkot because they changed to Passover. Why do we think that it was Sukkot? Because that's when we have palm fronds that are already cut. And remember, when he comes back into Jerusalem, they're laying palm fronds down for him. Palm fronds, the skach. Okay, and we cut it. We don't cut palm fronds in April.
So why did they change it to Passover?
Because it works better to combine that on their theology of evil being defeated by good, winter turning to spring, renewal, rebirth, resurrection. Okay, think about it. Okay, he comes in and everyone's got palm fronds already cut that they're laying at his feet. When do we cut palm fronds? Before Sukkot. We cut in the fall. We don't cut. You don't get your palm fronds trimmed in April. You get them trimmed in the fall, right? So it's just common sense.
How about the Passover Seder?
What about the Passover Seder?
Well, the Last Supper.
They call it Passover Seder. What do we do on the first night of Sukkot?
Nobody calls the palm fronds except if you celebrate Sukkot.
Exactly. And we have services, don't we? And we have liturgy, and we have services. Okay. Now, we don't have a Seder, but we have the services, and we still do our evening service in the Sukkot. And moreover, when they start overlaying Passover, now it makes sense. Let's combine a Passover Seder and Sukkot. And so now we're going to have the bread. This is my body. The wine. This is my blood. And the bread is matzah. So they kind of overlay it. But historically, it was probably Sukkot. Okay. So now you've got understand that the Gospels are not they're not at the same time as Jesus's life. They're not written by people who have experience of Judaism or Jesus in a Jewish framework. They're written by people a century later, okay, who have their own issues, especially with the Jewish establishment who's been persecuting them, because the Jewish establishment did. We said, you're crazy. And now, does anyone know who really promoted Christianity and Jesus? Who was the big guy? Paul, right? Paul, originally named Saul, right? Okay,
Is that true?
yeah, Saul. However,
When you say promoted Christianity,
he was the one who went out and
but it wasn't called Christianity.
no, they're still calling themselves Jews at that time. So he went out, and he never even met Jesus. Supposedly, he met Jesus' ghost on the road.
Right.
He met the resurrected Jesus, and he's going out and being the great salesman. So they create these books, the Gospels, called Good News, and in these books, there is an anti-Semitic flavor to them. Okay, because again, they're not just angry at the Romans; they're angry at the Jews. Now you combine what's going on in the world and what's going on in people's psyche. If you accept Jesus as the personification of good, and we have God, and God is everything, right? If you accept the personification of good in Jesus, then we naturally need to have a personification of evil. And so Hasatan, who's only mentioned in the book of Job as an angel who creates obstacles in our way to strengthen us, becomes evil. Okay? When we think of Satan, we think of all sorts of things, including horns, a tail, etc. Right? Okay. In Exodus chapter 34, Moses comes down from Mount Sinai. And it says there that light shone from his head, and the word is cut on. But remember, there's no vowels in Hebrew, right? Let me just look at, I need to check the exact date because I don't remember the exact date and I don't want to misquote. So what happens, so just remember that. Now there's another word called Karen. Karen means a horn.
In Hebrew also?
In Hebrew, okay? But Jerome in 382, who's a Hebrew scholar, he's with the church, he writes what is called the Vulgate, okay? He writes the Vulgate. The Vulgate is a Latin translation of the Hebrew scriptures. And in his translation, he consciously mistranslates Quran into Karen. As a result, the text from the 4th century on of the Christian version of the book of Exodus says that Moses, rather than light shone from his head, Moses has horns. And if you look at the statue of Michelangelo, how many of you have you all seen that?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you seen it? Okay,
I've seen pictures.
yeah, no, I've never seen the live thing either. So, got horns. Okay, if you look at the bas relief in the House of Representatives building, okay, remember we looked at that. There's horns, right, on Moses, because that's what it says. Now, that becomes the official translation of the church, the Vulgate. How long? When do you think that stopped being remember, it's written in the 4th century? When do you think that stopped being the official translation? The official
Very
translation.
recently.
Yeah, sometime in the 70s, I think. 70s, 80s. And so people still have their Bible.
I remember the Pope coming up with that.
Yeah, so you still have in today's Bibles, you go into a Christian household, maybe it was grandma's Bible or grandpa's Bible, and it's in Exodus 34, and it says he came down with horns.
So
Okay.
it wasn't meant to be disrespectful, it was just an interpretation?
No, it was very conscious.
Okay, because I
it
always
was?
thought it was.
Oh, absolutely was conscious, because Jerome clearly knows the difference. Because in other places he uses Karen as Karen, and he uses Quran as Quran. But in this one place, he changes it so it comes down with horns. And we pay the price for it even today. Because even today, Jews are asked, where are your horns? How many of you have been asked that or know someone who asked them? Okay? A lot of times this happens in the military, by the way. You know, they're in basic training together, and Bubba says, okay, David, you and I are friends. Show me your horns. Okay, and this happens today.
Kids in Jewish school that I know, it's called Emek.
Mhm.
the kids walk from school for Shabbat, and they wear the kippot, the boys, and people scream at them. Is that to hide your horns?
The one that I think is really funny is that circumcision is not for the foreskin; it's for our horns. For our horns.
Oh my God.
Okay, so by the time now you're in the 4th century, the gestalt around the world is in the non-Jewish and the Christian world is we killed God and we have horns. Okay, just remember this. So we're talking about anti-Semitism that starts 2,000 years ago. Everyone with me? All right. So that's going on around us. We don't have a homeland. We don't know what the hell's going on. By the way, when the Dalai Lama was thrown out of Tibet, first people he wanted to meet with were rabbis. Because he wanted to know, how did you keep your culture alive without having your indigenous land? Okay? And we did it through what happens in this period, in these centuries. So the Jews are dispersed. Ultimately, they will go into 3 areas. They will go through the Middle East, the Saudi Peninsula, up into Morocco and Spain and Portugal and Italy and France. They will go around and go up into Europe, into Eastern Europe, Russia, Lithuania, Poland, etc. And some will stay also in that Saudi Peninsula. The ones who go up into Eastern Europe, we call Ashkenaz. The ones who go into Spain, Portugal, etc. The word for Spain, that name of that country is Sephard. So we call them Sephardi. And the ones, it's a subsect of Sephardic Jews, the ones who stay in Iran, Iraq, that area, are called Mizrahi. Okay? So we disperse in all of them. And we're picking up the habits of the different cultures. Starting to do that. A simple way of demonstrating the difference between I'm going to have to pound on the table. I know you hate that. A simple, we don't have a dumbek there, do we? No, we don't. Okay, a simple, no, it's okay. We don't have a drum. We just have to have a, so a simple change, I'll do a clapping, of Sephardic versus Ashkenazi because of the cultural influence. Ashkenazi melody. Right? Very Germanic march, right? Exact same notes. Sephardic. Okay, do you guys see the same notes? Almost the same rhythm, but just a slightly different, it's like ragtime. So
How about
Mizrahi
Mizrahi?
is the subsect of Sephardic. So we start picking up those customs. But because there had been this community in Iran, which is we're going through, the Sephardim we're going through, that had an ancient history. Remember, it goes back to the 6th century. That's really where the intellect of Judaism where it becomes the seat of the intellect of Judaism. So we have the Talmud, it's done. Gemara's finished. We're in the 400s. We got this Vulgate going on. And we have what are called Gaons. Gaon literally means pride. Okay? So you didn't have chief rabbis. You had the Gaon of each area. Okay?
What language is that?
Hebrew. It's Gaon. So you have, I believe it's Hebrew. So I'd have to double check. I'm pretty sure it's Hebrew. For sure.
How do you say genius in Hebrew?
Carefully. I'm not sure. I would say genius. But Gaon is a pride. It might be the same word because it literally means pride. So you have these Gaons of different areas. Okay. So you might have the Gaon of the Westlake Gaon. Okay.
Gaon.
Is it Gaon?
Genius.
Yeah. So now it's converted as genius. Yeah. It means pride. And you have what becomes known as the Gaonic period. Now, this is where genius comes in. Okay. They've recovered to whatever extent they can from the destruction of the temple and the challenges that created. But how do we keep Judaism alive? What do we need to do to keep Judaism alive? And so they reverse engineer what was going on in the temple when the temple existed. Right? And they realized that the entire service is based on the 4-letter name of Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey. Physical with a little spiritual with a little physical, purely spiritual. Okay. And we see that throughout we talked about that enough. We see that throughout our liturgy, throughout things. And they create a siddur, an order of services. And instead of being a people of building or people of the land, we become a people of the book, and we have a portable homeland. Because now they're creating a siddur, an order of our prayer services, with the intention that the participant, if they really are, they have strong kavanah, strong intention, they're very focused, and if they really have an understanding of the service, and they let the service move through them, the service takes you from a place of just, we're doing whatever in work or whatever, to a place of physical with spiritual, physical with spiritual, spiritual with physical, purely spiritual. Which is why in the Amidah, the prayer that we say, blessed are you, Lord God, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, what do we need to do? We stand with our feet together. Why? Because we're like angels. We only have one leg. We know what our purpose is. We do not pray the Amidah prays us. That's why Adonai Savataki Takufi Yagid Tehilatecha literally means Yagid is a binyan hifil. It's a specific conjugation of the word to tell, like Haggadah or Agadah, but it is in causative form. So it's not that my mouth may pray you, but rather that you may cause my mouth to pray you. You guys see the difference? It's a subtle difference, but it's a very deep one. That's why we say Adonai Sefatatitak Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha. It's causative. Do you know Hebrew grammar? You know Hebrew grammar. So this is binyan hifil. Okay, good. So you can verify. I'm not. Go on.
I do have a question. Sorry, it's very fast for me. The history.
I told you 1,000 years in 60 minutes, man. I got to keep about 15 years a minute. What do you want me to do?
I think that it's important because you said this, and I've heard this also when I read in Jewish history that we went from being a people of the temple or building to a people of the book. My question to you regarding that is, in our second exile, when we went again to what is the Talmudic period, basically. Right. From what I understand, this is when Jews started to think, what does it mean to be a Jew outside of the land of Israel?
The Talmud starts taking us into that place, and then the Gaonic period takes us there. This becomes rabbinic Judaism. It's no longer biblical Judaism at all. It's rabbinic
what
Judaism.
What does that mean? Yeah, can you explain that?
Biblical Judaism is you got to go to the temple and sacrifice a dove. Okay? You're going to go and you got to make sure you light some incense. Right? Anyone here a Levite? You got to wash my feet. Okay, as a Kohen, right? All these biblical laws, and what they have to become is they have to become interpreted so we can practice them without having a temple. There are only 20-some, if it's 22 or 26, there are only 20-some laws in the Torah, the 613, that we can still practice exactly the way it was practiced when the temple existed.
Like
Sukkot, where we love that. So
there were
matzah, shmur matzah. There's some laws that we can still do, but it's so we stop being focused on we have to make a pilgrimage. We don't go to it. We don't have to make a pilgrimage to Judaism on Passover, Sukkot, and Shavuos, right? We don't do that.
Like that?
There were the 3 festivals of walking, yeah. So you had to make a pilgrimage. Again, that goes back to Jesus having to go back to Jerusalem for Passover, Sukkot, or Shavuot. You had to go back. You had to go to the temple. So we got to figure out how we're going to survive. And so these Gaons create a siddur. They reverse engineer the service, realize it's based on the 4-lettered name, and ultimately they create an order of services, an order of prayers to achieve that change, that heightened state of awareness, that change in our neurochemistry into a place of more awareness. What's called an HSA, a heightened state of awareness, or a USB, a unified state of being. Okay, so they create this, and they're really the 2 big Gaons who do that are Sa'adi Gaon and High Gaon. The siddur we use today, this siddur that we use today, is virtually identical to what was used 1,000 years ago.
Wait, so during the temple there were no siddurs?
No,
They didn't have to?
you didn't have to. Kohanim are doing everything. The Levites doing it. You just showed up and did what you needed to do.
So you didn't have to pray to God?
You pray to God, but you didn't have this order of services. Now the order of services is described in great detail in the book of Leviticus, what needs to be done. But this becomes our pathway. There is the teaching that if you understand the Siddur and you understand all of the Jewish holidays in their depths, you understand all of Judaism. Everything's hidden in plain sight. So, you guys notice we picked up some, I ordered and we got some more stuff for our library, some beautiful art school. Because I love art school. I understand it's the Orthodox publisher, but I like it's straight Hebrew to English translation, and it's beautiful, and so it's a good thing. So, what these guys finish, okay? So by let's say 1,000 years ago, is virtually unchanged. I mean, yes, there's changes. We've added prayers about the Shoah. We've added prayers about martyrs throughout the history. But really, the prayer service is basically unchanged. It's basically unchanged. And remember, it's Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey. So the first part, Birkat HaShachar, are all prayers that revolve around purely physical. The second part is prayers that are physical, a little spiritual, which is Pesukah de Zimra, the hymns. The third part, which is the Shemanis blessings, are spiritual prayers with a little physical. And then the Amidah is purely spiritual. And then 3 times a week, remember there's a little kutz of the Yud, the little infinitesimally small part we talked about. That happens 3 times a week. It's called the Torah service. It's where we connect with God. Okay? So this is why the services are so important, and the liturgy is so important as a foundation. So there's in services, there's keva and kavanah. Kavanah is intention, keva is structure. If you only have keva and no kavanah, you have what is effectively the empty Orthodox service that if you've ever been to one. That just let's run through the prayers as fast as possible. We're done. Let's go. If you have just kavanah, no keva, you just have a New Age BS. Okay. I went to Passover. I was in Arizona. Yeah, this before I was married, and there was a seder. So I couldn't find a temple, but I called the temple, and one of their families was having a seder, and I made an excuse, right or wrong. I made an excuse to leave after the first half hour, because before they did the seder, they wanted to walk around with tambourines around the pool, singing, "We're being prepared to cross the Sea of Reeds." It was just too offensive to me. I couldn't do it. There was no structure. It was just intention. The Siddur balances both. And when you do a Siddur, you typically do not do everything in the Siddur. Okay, so if we look at a conservative movement Siddur, if we look at the high holidays, it's Mussar, this is the high holiday Siddur, right? We don't do this whole book in Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. The key is, what prayers does anyone pick? Because we're going to do them in English, we're going to do them in Hebrew, so what prayers do you pick? Each of those sections of the prayer service are bridged by a Kaddish prayer. Because Kaddish is a bridging prayer. That's what it literally is. Kaddish does not mention death. Kaddish is a bridge prayer. If it's mourner's Kaddish, it's between this world and the next world. If it's other Kaddish, it's a prayer between this section and that section of the prayer service. So they create this Siddur, and it really is a level of spiritual genius that is unmatched, I think, in anything in the world.
What part? Where were they?
They're in the Saudi Peninsula.
No. This is in the Sinai Peninsula.
The Saudi Peninsula.
Oh, Saudi.
So this is Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, that part of the world. Okay. So they create this period, and so we become a people of the book with this Siddur. Okay. And it keeps us alive. It keeps us alive because it keeps our theology. It keeps people entering into an altered state of awareness. That's why you feel good after a service. And it keeps our language alive. For 2,000 years, Hebrew is not a spoken language. It is a prayer language. It's not a spoken language. If you're in 1400, you're in 1600, 1700 Eastern Europe, you're speaking Yiddish. If you're in Spain, Portugal, you're speaking Ladino, which is Yiddish is a combination of Hebrew and German and Polish and a little Russian, a little English. Ladino is a combination of Spanish, Portuguese, and Hebrew. And so you have these beautiful spoken languages. So you can identify another Jew. By the way, that's all both those languages are commerce-based. I don't know if you realize that. So they're commerce-based. In Europe, and we're going to fast forward but in Europe, if you have Mr. Smith and Mr. Goldberg, Mr. Smith is Catholic and Mr. Goldberg is Jewish, and Mr. Smith cheats Mr. Goldberg. Mr. Goldberg cannot go to the courts to sue Mr. Smith, so he's stuck. You can't we can't sue. We can't go to use the courts that way. So you want to do business with Jews. How do I know you're a Jew? Because you speak Yiddish, you speak Ladino. So they begin as languages of commerce. Okay, and as a need, so you can recognize a Jew.
What about in Israel?
In Israel in the 20th century, we start getting Hebrew as a spoken language again.
Oh, before then,
Now, and that's why. So Hebrew is a prayer language. By the Ashkenazi, was pronounced certain ways, and Sephardic pronounced it other ways. And because of a man named Achad Ha'am, in modern Israel, they chose to go with the Sephardic pronunciations. So when I grew up in religious school learning Hebrew, Baruch et Adonai Hamevorach. When you grew up
Same thing.
you grew up the same way?
Because it's reconstruction.
Okay, so
No,
Alan, you grew up Baruch es, right?
Yep.
Baruch es Adonai, right?
yes.
But I thought that was a Yiddish. That's what the
No,
Chabad they do.
No, it's
Shabbos.
not.
It's
It's
Shabbos.
not Yiddish. It's because the Tov, whether it has a dagesh or not, there's letters Bet Gimel Dalet Chaf Fe Resh and Tov can have a dot in them, and the letters are pronounced differently. We know in because you used to do Hebrew, a dot with a bet is either a bet or a bet. A dot with a fe is either fe or pei. It's fa or pa, right? A kaf is either ka or cha. But a tov with a dot is either, or without a dot, is either sa or ta.
Okay.
So that's why you get Baruch es Adonai as opposed
I
to
don't
Baruch
care what he
et.
says, it's still Shabbos.
It's
I
still
still say good job.
I say good Shabbos all the time.
And why did that change?
So those pronunciations became different in the different communities. And then in modern Israel, they chose the pronunciations that were Sephardic pronunciations. So it's not S, it's et. They ignored their okay? But so that's what modern Israel is. And if you go to an Orthodox Yiddish shul or an Orthodox Ashkenazi shul, which might be Chabad, it might be any number of schools, they will be saying S. Okay? So it's not Yiddish. That's the Hebrew because of the dagesh. It's Beged Kafarta. That's how you remember the letters. It spells Beged Kafarta. So yeah,
That's what I
So
know.
before Israel was formed,
Hebrew's not a spoken language.
what did they speak? There were some Jews there.
But
Just Yiddish.
no, it depends on where they were. First of all, even
They're
2000,
Arabic then,
even
or-
1800 years ago, they're speaking Aramaic. Kaddish is an Aramaic prayer. Kaddish is not in Hebrew,
Okay, so
Actually,
that's
in
where they were speaking Aramaic.
and Hebrew is the prayer language. So this is why what ends up happening when the Dalai Lama comes out of Tibet, Sanskrit is still kept as a prayer language for them, for Tibetan Buddhists. They pray in Sanskrit. Okay, so but they're not speaking in Sanskrit. So
Okay, so that's right. 'Cause you said Yiddish was established by where
they were.
because there's a mixture of languages. Okay.
So they're speaking Polish, they're speaking Russian, they're speaking German, they're speaking English, but they're praying in Hebrew,
It brings them all together.
which brings them all together and keeps them tied back to biblical understandings. Okay,
I just have a tangential question. Where does Aramaic come in?
everything comes from Hebrew. How is that for a great ethnocentric answer? Which is actually our traditional answer. Aramaic is very related to Hebrew.
Yeah,
It's very, very similar. Usually, one of the big differences is that in Aramaic, a word that ends in a hey in Aramaic often ends, in Hebrew often ends in an aleph in Aramaic.
And then them.
The letters look similar. The letters are similar letters, yeah. So we have spoken language, but Hebrew is our prayer language, and it's kept alive because of the Siddur, because of these Gaons. So this becomes how we become Jews. Now we're rabbinic Jews. We're no longer biblical Jews. We're practicing Judaism based on how it can be interpreted after the destruction of the temple. So even though we still, in an Orthodox service and an observant service, we still recite the prayers over the korbanot, which are the sacrifices, because we don't do sacrifices today. Those are usually placed in a non-really observant, really ultra-Orthodox synagogue. They'll say the korbanot prayers, but they're typically not They're typically replaced with different psalms or hymns. Okay, so but if you look in the prayer book, there's a whole section that's generally just in the Hebrew, because if you're not way ultra orthodox, you're not reciting the korbanot, which is a korban is a sacrifice. Korbanot is the prayers. So now you got this Gaonic period going on. Okay, we've got our own prayer language, but we're still the outsider. Why are we the outsider? Well, we don't eat certain foods. We celebrate the Sabbath on Friday night to Saturday night. Okay, Christians changed to Sunday. Why? Because that's the day that Jesus rises back up. So for them, that's now the Sabbath. We don't, Jesus Shmizis, we keep doing what we're doing. So they keep doing the Shabbat on Friday night to Saturday night. We keep our practices. We don't wear certain clothing mixed together. We eat certain things, we don't eat certain things. And what ends up happening as a result of that is we are always the outsider wherever we go. So we're an outsider. And we killed God and we have horns. Right? Because Christians don't, and the thing that we do with the most basic commandment to Jews is what God commands Abraham to do, the circumcision, the Brit Milah, the covenant of the foreskin. The name of the Christian Bible is not New Testament. It's Brit Chadash, New Covenant. I actually, many years ago, Rabbi Alfred Wolf, blessed memory, I don't know if any of you remember him, he was the number 2 rabbi for decades to Rabbi Edgar Magnan at Wilshire. And Rabbi Wolf was he with Royal Vatican, they were truly the 2 pioneers in interfaith dialogue on the West Coast. And Rabbi Wolf, who married my parents and who I knew all my life, Rabbi Wolf had donated his library to the LMU library. So we had to, because that's a good Catholic university on the West Coast. So I get a call from the new head librarian at LMU. Rabbi, can you come give me a hand? We're cataloging things, and I don't know what they mean. Okay, so I'm looking at these books. I say, this is this book, this is this book, this is this book, because they're all in Hebrew. And then I'm looking at this book, and it says Brit Chadash. What's Brit Chadash? Okay, what? And then I'm realizing, wait a minute. Yonatan, Matisyahu. This is the Christian scriptures all in Hebrew to help facilitate conversion to Jews. Okay, isn't it interesting? I was like, oh my God! I just like this light went off. This is the New Testament. This Christian scripture in Hebrew, and it doesn't say New Testament. It says Brit Chadash, New Covenant, because the Old Covenant is superseded in their belief by the New Covenant. Except Jesus, you don't have to do any of the commandments. So we're outsiders. But we're different kind of outsiders, because traditionally our values are education. Our values is we want our children to be better than us, right? The door of a door. Our values are we're teaching our children, even in those days, how to daven in Hebrew. So they're learning another language, which develops a whole entirely different part of the brain that is related to both music and mathematics. Okay, it's the same part of the neurochemistry. So we're teaching our children traditionally this, so they're actually thinking differently. And then we're teaching them Talmud, where they're organizing and thinking in a very different way than what the Christian kids are learning. So what can we do? We can't become landowners because we're not citizens, we're an outsider. So what do we start becoming? We start becoming merchants, become peasants, we become mid-level merchants. Become money changers, accountants, because we're thinking in this way. Now, think for a minute. You guys are all nobility, okay? In Europe, you guys are peasants. None of you are Jews, okay? You want to make sure that you're getting the right amount of money from them. You want to make sure that all the accounting is done properly. So you hire the Jew over there to go do it. So he is collecting money from you and giving it to him. But you don't like him because he's collecting the money. You don't trust him because he's an outsider. You think he's stealing some anyhow. So everybody hates him.
I've heard too that the Christian community weren't supposed to charge interest or something like that.
That's from Torah. It's Torah law. We're not allowed to charge interest on each other. So we become so we're hated by everybody, and we're different, and we eat different, and we dress different, and we look different. So we have what? Even though we assimilate, we pick up a lot of the habits, especially Catholic habits. Any misogyny in Judaism is not Jewish. Any misogyny in Judaism is Catholic. That's a blanket statement, but it's just pretty much true. Because our archetypes of women are Sarah, right? Rebecca, Leah, Rachel, Deborah, and Miriam. Their archetypes of women are Virgin Mary and a whore Mary. Okay? There's your wife and there's your mistress. Okay? We don't have that. We have your wife, and you can have parts of your body cut off. That's just your wife. Okay? So we pick up a lot of anything that you see of misogynistic in Judaism really is because of Catholic influence. An example being in the Talmud, you've seen Orthodox guys and the woman has to walk behind them, right? It's ludicrous. That's not Jewish.
I've never seen that.
Oh, it's how many of you guys have seen that? Yeah, and that's Catholic. The woman's second class. It says in the Talmud you shouldn't be walking behind a woman because you're not going to be thinking about what you're supposed to be thinking about. You're going to be thinking about her tochas instead. Okay, but it doesn't mean that she's got to walk behind you. It means she walks next to you. It's true. If Allison's in front of me, depending on what she's wearing, I maybe not be thinking about teaching a class tonight. My consciousness may be in a whole other place. Okay, so that's an example. And by the way, pretty much everything that is sacred in Judaism in the physical world is a feminine word. Menorah, mezuzah, Torah, Shabbat. These are all grammatically feminine words. I just wrote an article for American Thinker. The Anglican Church is having an issue right now, just this past week, that it's been brought up in the General Synod that they're trying to figure out language that's going to appease all of the gender activists. Well, I wrote an article about it, which is real simple. We've been doing it for 2,000 years. Look at our Siddur. Understand what the name Yod He Vav He means. Understand that it's a simultaneous conjugation of the verb to exist in both future and past tense, in both masculine and feminine. And we refer to God as Rabbona Shalom or Ruach HaKodesh. Huh?
We're non-binary.
We are binary. No, we are binary. But God's non-binary. That's right. What would be the opposite of non-binary? God is binary. God is both. Right? We don't have much gas. So I actually just wrote this article for American Thinker about it. So just today. So I said, to the bishop, my suggestion to you is instead of trying to figure out how to do this, just go back to what we are. And if you can't figure out how to use any of these phrases properly, just call God Hashem. And if you call God Hashem, you'll be fine. But so here we are. We're outsiders. We killed God. We have horns. All right? And we are different. So we're now related to Satan because we did all those things. And then you have a transformative moment that takes anti-Semitism to a whole other level. In 1144 in Norwich, England, you have a boy that right around Passover disappears. Okay? Disappears. And so the myth becomes, from this priest in Norwich, and it's repeated throughout the next century in different places, that he disappeared because Jews must make matzah with blood. That every year a council of Jews decides which Christian child is going to be killed. They hang him upside down on a crucifix, and they draw his blood, and that's what they make the matzah with. So now we killed God, we have horns, and we have blood. And this becomes the foundation of anti-Semitism. Okay. And it's called the blood libel. Right? And it still manifests today in different ways. But that becomes, by this point, we're the outsider. We have all these qualities that are antithetical to being holy or being good. By the way, is it even possible that a Jew could eat matzah with blood? No. I can't have steak tartare, let alone matzah with blood. I can't. It specifically says in Torah, you're forbidden from having blood.
And when we break the egg, if we have like a speck of blood,
It's not. You discard it, right? So you can't. You're forbidden. I can't have steak tartare.
Why What's steak tartare?
raw steak meat.
Oh.
It's where you take really great ground beef and well, no, because when I didn't always keep kosher. When I was a kid, I didn't keep kosher. So, I know exactly what it is. It's raw meat. It's mixed with typically onions, maybe an egg. With the onions and the egg, usually egg, but it's really onions, and you get extremely fine steak, and it's ground up. And you eat it. And how many of you ever had steak tartare? You're not missing anything, although it can be amazing. There's no such thing as a kosher steak tartare. You can make a kosher fillet, by the way. They are doing kosher fillets because they by hand pull out the sciatica. But I can't have blood. It's specifically forbidden. So how can I make matzah with blood? It's ludicrous. Just like it's ludicrous that we had a court date on a holy day. Just like it's ludicrous that we have horns. But that becomes the root of anti-Semitism. And so we enter into the Middle Ages as we start getting to the 12th, 13th, 14th centuries. We enter into the Middle Ages with this radical anti-Semitism against us because of all the evils that we have done, in theory, because of a mistranslation with the Vulgate, because of the Gospels having an agenda. And we enter into this world without a homeland, and our homeland becomes the book, the Siddur, and the Tanakh, and the Talmud. And that's where we start going in the world. The intellects of Judaism, though, most of them are Sephardic. Spain, France, Italy, Morocco, Egypt, the Middle East. That's really where the Jewish seat of wisdom is. The Ashkenazi are extremely influenced by Catholicism and not nearly as dedicated to the learning and to the text and to understanding, to exploring the text. Right. So if you look at the great commentators, which we're going to go into next week, you find the vast majority of them are actually Sephardic. Okay. And there's this great history. Now, there's a period that ends up happening. It's really interesting because it's basically the same time period as what's going on in Norwich, England. In another part of the world, in Spain, where the Sephardim are, you have a unique time period in the same time called convivencia, where you have Jewish wisdom, Catholic wisdom, and Islamic wisdom all interacting together with respect for each other. And you have this flowering that will ultimately turn into the Renaissance. But it starts with what's called convivencia, and it is this period where they're all interacting with each other in a way of really learning and exploring. Look, we're still second-class citizens. We still killed God, all those things, but there's a knowledge base that happens. And so you start having a different world also in that it's a brief flowering that happens for 150 years or so. And it's let me see something. When do they define convivencia as? Convivencia. Convencia is, and it means literally living together. And
where did this take place?
Spain. And it happens, I'm trying to see if they say actually the year. Yeah, they started in 970. And certainly through 1492. Okay. It's in the Inquisition and all of that. So that's going on as well at the same time. And we're the outsiders. But what keeps us alive is the Siddur. It keeps us spiritually alive. I want to just fast forward to the 21st century for a moment. If you do not have Jews gathering together in prayer and in study, they lose their identity, right? Which means we need to get Jews back in the seats in temples. The conservative movement, which has failed, let's be clear, the conservative movement, we'll talk about movements, has failed. In the 1950s, the conservative movement was the biggest Jewish movement in the country. It has failed because it was identified, we're not Reform, we're not Orthodox, and it was based a lot in guilt. You're going to learn to daven, otherwise Uncle Tevye died in a pogrom in vain, right? you're going to learn to daven. Or Uncle Shmuley died in Auschwitz in Maine. And then when you get to the 70s, you're going to learn to daven. Otherwise, Uncle Hussein died in Tehran in vain. Guilt doesn't last very long. And so the conservative movement has been trying to redefine themselves as having purpose. It's now the smallest of movements. But it's trying to identify itself. The people who are trying to determine what the conservative movement should be are the people who have made it fail. So that kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay. And so we need to get Jews back in seats, involved in prayer. But they're not going to get involved in prayer. Prayer is not meaningful. They're not going to get involved in prayer learning if we make it difficult for them by, as an example, charging membership dues, paying for tickets. That's a phenomenon that starts in the mid-20th century. And only the Reform and conservative world, not in the Orthodox and not anywhere outside of the United States, Canada, South Africa, and England. I mean, there's a few other communities, but those are really the 4 places. We got to go back to what our great-grandparents did, which is everyone comes. Alan, you do air conditioning. We need a new air conditioning, right? Maya, your husband does carpets. We need a new carpet. Okay. Everyone chooses to do it because otherwise Judaism, God forbid, will die. We need to have Jews. What has kept us alive, we need to go back to.
How do you define yourself?
As a Jew.
And the temple?
As Jewish. Rabbi Shulchan has a great comment. Michael, you're what I like to call a non-practicing Orthodox Jew. Because I'll wear leather and I'll wear fabrics that I shouldn't wear together. That's how we're Jewish. And the movements, we're going to get to that, but the movements only start 250 years ago. There are no movements prior to that. So the point is that our foundation of where we are in the 21st century really happens in this period. Do you guys see all that?
Mm-hmm.
The anti-Semitism really happens in this period. The survival of our people happens in this period that just got glossed over in your history class when you were in a confirmation class at your temple, right? You had your bar mitzvah, and now you're 14 years old, and they get to this period, oh, we've got Talmud, and then boom, all of a sudden you're in the Middle Ages with commentators. What happened in between? But do you see why it's so important? But it doesn't happen. There's no momentous marking. It's not like the expulsion from Spain in 1492. It's not like a commentator in a certain period. It's a gradual change from biblical Judaism to what we call rabbinic Judaism. Okay? Where no longer is it about you have to make a pilgrimage to the temple. It becomes about the Siddur. Does that make sense to everyone? So for how many of you was this new?
A lot of it. Yeah, a lot of it.
Okay. That's and I think it's important to understand that because we need to understand what kept us alive in those time periods because we need it again. We are effectively in the same time period after the Holocaust as they were a century after the destruction of the temple. There's really very little difference. Okay. How do we deal with the Holocaust? How are we Jews? How do we assimilate? How do we keep our Jewish identity? And there's a story from the Talmud that I think is a good place to maybe end this because I pretty much did an hour and 1,000 years in an hour. There's a story of, I believe it's Rabbi Akiva. It's either Rabbi Meir or Rabbi Akiva. I think it's Rabbi Akiva. And he's in jail and he's going to be killed. And he's still teaching Torah. And so one of his disciples says, how can you still be doing this? And he answers with a parable. He says, there was a fox, and the fox walked by and saw these fish. And they were very anxious in the stream. And the fox said to the fish, why are you so anxious? And he said, well, because the humans are trying to catch us and kill us. And the fox said, well, why don't you come out of the water and be with me like our ancestors were? And you'll be fine. And the fish laughed and said, you're supposed to be so wise, O fox. You are clearly the most foolish of all creatures. If we are in danger in our stream, how much more danger are we in when we are out of our stream? And Akiva finishes the story. The story finishes in the Talmud. After Akiva finishes, he says, our stream is Torah. It is the life and length of our days. If we let go of that, how much more danger are we in? Assimilation never serves the Jewish people. Never. It has never helped the Jewish people throughout history. I mean, it helps us. We gotta be able to function in the non-Jewish world. But when we lose who we are, we lose. And I think that's really important to remember. They figured out how to keep Judaism alive when there was no Judaism. Their transition was much bigger. It went from a temple to now what are we going to do? We don't have that issue. But if we don't figure out how we keep ourselves alive in our stream, then where will we be? So this lesson, again, I think it's so important to realize what anti-Semitism is. I love your comment. It's the hate that mutates, the virus that keeps going. And how do we keep in our stream? By doing what we're doing here, whether it's classes, whether it's services, by being in our stream. And how do we convey that in a way so that people realize, so Jews realize, if you want to go be with the fox, you're going to die a lot faster. Because you'll lose your identity, and then they're still going to kill you. Does that make sense with all of this? The other thing to recognize is the following about anti-Semitism. You're talking a 2,000-year history. Inbred.
In what?
Inbred. Taught by your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather, generation to generation. That does not get erased so easily. After the Holocaust, it was not popular to be an anti-Semite. I mean, how do you say, those Jews, they deserved Auschwitz. This is not a popular statement in modern culture in the 20th century. So it's hidden for a generation, and that's all it's hidden for. Where we still know about those Jews, but we're not going to talk about it. The 1970s, it starts getting couched as anti-Israel. And by now, it's no longer even only anti-Israel. It's anti-Semitic. Okay? That way you've always had anti-Semites in Congress. To say you didn't would be foolish. But it has become to a point where they can be blatantly anti-Semitic and still
Accepted by
So we need to be true to who we are, and we need to really have Ahavat Yisrael, a love for Jews in Israel. Ahavat Torah, a love for Torah, for our traditions, our laws, and Ahavat Hashem, a love of God. That's our stream. And they did that, and they created a way to make that stream, to get a boat that would float through that stream. And that's how we are Jews today. Okay. But when I hear, as I heard a number of years ago in San Francisco, I was up there for a funeral, and I was talking to someone, the Shiva Minyan, the reception after it was a Shiva Minyan. And they were talking about how their husband had converted, and I said, that really takes a lot of love and courage, especially more for a man than a woman. She said, why? I said, because a man needs to either be circumcised, or if he's been circumcised, he needs to have 3 drops of blood taken. That's the law. She goes, oh no, he didn't have to do that. I said, what? There was a Reform rabbi who just said, you're a Jew. We need to be true to our stream. We need to make the Brit Milah, the covenant with God. We need to have our love and our beauty, and we need to know who we are. We need to remember what we learned in Talmud last week. Imenanili mili. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? If not now, when? So we need to be Jews. So that's 1,000 years in an hour. How'd I do?
That's good.
Okay. Yes.
So when they call the New Testament the New Covenant,
It's actually New Covenant, right? We don't,
is that a way so they wouldn't have to be circumcised?
among other things.
That's
Look, all right, I want you to imagine. Here you are, a pagan. Okay? It's 150 in the Common Era. We don't say AD because that stands for Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. So 150 in the Common Era. And I come up to you as a Jew, and Lois comes up to you, and she's a non-Jew. She's Christian. And you say, I like this idea of one God. It makes more sense to me than Zeus and Hera and et cetera, et cetera. I say, great. So we're going to cut off the foreskin of your penis. You can't eat lobster anymore. Got all these rules and laws. Okay. Paul says, yeah, we believe in one God. Just accept Jesus in your heart. Boom, you're Christian. Which is a better sales technique? I mean, honestly, which are you going to go to? Right? It's just pure marketing. Okay. On the one hand, accept this guy who's not alive in your heart. On the other hand, give me your foreskin. It's really not. It's not such a, hard sell to the pagan.
It's not easy to be a convert. I remember even when Sue was thinking about converting, and we went to a conservative rabbi, and he literally was trying. It's almost like he was talking Sue out of it.
Yeah.
They do.
And I'm
But
thinking,
that's the job.
I just hope he doesn't work too hard.
So the tradition is that you 3 times reject the potential convert. I think that's incredibly ludicrous, but the idea is that way you know that they really want to do it for their nefesh, their ruach, and their neshama, the 3 aspects of their soul.
What did you say?
It's 3 times you
No,
reject
but you
them
said because of
so that they really their nefesh demonstrates
soul, nefesh,
their ruach, soul,
spirit.
which is so nefesh is the physical, ruach is the mental, emotional, and neshama is the spiritual. In the Lakota tradition, and many of the Plains Indian traditions, you study to become a pipe carrier, the chanupa, the medicine pipe, and so you're about to get your pipe. Now I'm going to take it back. You got to do something else, and they do that 4 times until they finally, you got to show you want it. And we want to make sure that the person who is converting to Judaism isn't doing it just so they can get married to the Jew, but they're doing it because it's their journey. It's because the idea is that a Jew by choice is someone who is a Jewish soul, born with a Jewish soul, who chose a harder path to not be in a Jewish body at birth. So it's actually, that's the idea. It's not, that's why I don't like the idea of conversion as a term. I think the right thing is you're just remembering. You're finding who you are. You're re-embracing who your soul really is. That's a harder place. And I think it's a matter of, it's a journey. It's learning, and it's so you can say, look, at a Beit Din, Dan, I think you're watching, so you and Leah should remember. In a Beit Din, the real question is not, do you know the law? The real question is, do you identify as a Jew? I serve on Beit Dins. It's not, we'll ask different questions. We want to make sure you're comfortable at a seat at the table. But it's not about that. It's about, can you say, I'm a Jew? And that's really the question that you're looking at. And then my favorite question that sometimes get asked at Beit Din, which is, where do you buy your kosher meat for your Yom Kippur lunch? You're laughing, but you've never seen someone. Wait a minute, I don't eat on Yom Kippur. Exactly. But it's not about that. Beit Din is actually a very loving experience. All the ones I've ever been in are very loving and gentle. And because by the time you've been vetted to the rabbi sponsoring you to come, it's pretty much, we know what you're doing. So you do it. So it's not that. It's very loving and beautiful. But all of this comes from this period. And that's why I think it's such a shanda that we don't ever study at least some of what happens in that period. How many of you have heard of the Gaonic period before tonight? It's not heard a lot. It's so important. Okay.
Quick question
Yeah.
for you. I don't know if this is true, but somebody told me recently that currently Mizrahi Sephardi rabbis are prohibiting conversions because of you cannot genetically be a Jew.
I don't know, and I don't want to know because it's just going to make me take on another fight that I don't want to have.
Okay.
I just honestly, oh wait, Dan and Leah. You are Dan, exactly. In big caps, I am a Jew! Exclamation point. So it's, see, they already love it. So that's on a certain level, that's absolutely ludicrous because we know from the Book of Ruth.
I mean, I'm
David
just
is
telling you what I'm.
So King David is the great grandson of a Jew by choice, right? So it's kind of ludicrous. In Israel, I don't know how it is today, but for a while, I think it's still true right now. They weren't accepting any conversions outside of Israel.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's still true today. I think it is. But the point is that It all stems from this. This is where we get it all from, is this time period. And it's also when we get anti-Semitism. It still exists today. So it's still part and parcel of the whole thing. But it gives us a pathway, right? It gives us a pathway that no matter where we think we are, God is giving us a pathway to stay in our stream, stay in our lane. And we need to do that. We need to really step into our lane and live it. Okay, we need to support Jewish communities. We need to, with our time, our effort, our energy, our money, we need to bring people. You know, one of the things that the Christians did that really is brilliant is the whole concept of the gospel. Spread the good news. Messiahs have been here. Spread the good news. Well, we need to do the same thing of spreading the good news of what Judaism is. Sometimes it's hard. When you've got different schools or different rabbis are doing different things sometimes it can be hard because it's not good news. It's not good news when rabbis are embezzling money. It's not good news when, you know, all sorts of things like that. But we need to do that. So what?
I was just repeating embezzling money. I
But
just,
it's the same.
Yeah. You know, the guy. You remember when Poway happened, and that rabbi's in prison. So, but the point is that that's really what we're. So, we'll take it up next week. We'll start dealing with commentaries. And thank you for tonight. I hope this was worthwhile.
Amazing. What do you mean by comedy? Like
Rashi, Rambam, Bachya.
Oh, yeah.